SSRS Architecture Overview. In this nugget, we're going to talk about the architecture of SQL Server reporting services. We're going to be looking at the basic components of SSRS architecture so you understand the basics, so then in the next few nuggets we can go into more advanced material. We're going to create a simple report, and then we'll implement drill down, as well as creating a drill through report and then embedding a sub-report into a parent report. After we create our reports, we're going to perform a simple deployment, and we'll also talk about the credentials when it comes to your data source. After we deploy our reports, then we can view them in the report server, and once again we'll discuss some of the security issues. In our report server, we can configure caching as well as report snapshots and also subscriptions, so end users can get up-to-date reports on a regular basis. Let's review our SSRS architecture a little bit. See here on the left-hand side we have clients that might be tapping into our reporting services. We have a couple different ways of communicating with the report processor. We can go through programming interfaces such as the SOAP API, or we can go through the report manager. From the report manager, which is accessed through a browser, you can then see your different reports that are available. If you are using the report manager, then it will in turn communicate with the programming interface, which then communicates with the report processor. Remember to go into your control panel, administrative tools, services, to make sure that your SQL Server service is up and running, as well as the reporting service. The report processor uses scheduling for various things, such as scheduling snapshots or scheduling subscriptions. So it can be one-time scheduling, or it can be something on a regular schedule, every morning, every week, whatever you configure. All the metadata regarding your reports is stored in a report server database, and there's also a report server temp database for any of the SSRS temporary information, such as caching. We also have here extensions, which is essentially a .NET assembly, and it's invoked by the report processor. Now there's several types of extensions, for example, delivery, data processing, rendering, security, and so on. We're going to start off with a simple report. We'll also look at parameterized reports as well as sub-reports, and then we're going to deploy it, and then we'll look at those reports from the perspective of the end user through a web browser. Before we carry on with more advanced features of SSRS, let's just do a little bit of review of reports. So I'm just going to create a new project in here under File, New, and I'll just make sure it's a report server project, and I'll just say Reports Review. Call it anything you want to. And under our shared data sources, and under Reports, I'm going to add a new report. So here I'm creating a new data source, and this is Microsoft SQL Server as opposed to some other flavor of database. And we'll make this shared so it can be reused. We need to have a connection string there, so I'm going to edit this, and my server name is Julie1. It could be different for you. I'm going to use Windows Authentication, and my database name is right in here, AdventureWorks DW 2008, and then we can test the connection, and it's good. Hit Next, and now I'm going to build my query. We're going to start off by using our report wizard, and one of the options in there is to create a drill down report. So really we just have to follow the wizard and it creates drill down for us. Then we're going to do a drill through report and then a sub report. So here I'll just right click on here and add my table. I'll just make this a really simple one. I'll call this dim geography. Add that table. I'd like to gather information about the internet sales, but you'll see that there really is no connection between these two tables here. But if I add the customer table, it's the go-between essentially. So you'll see that the foreign keys are automatically tacked on there. So you see the lines there connecting them? Okay, so now I'm going to select the columns that I'm interested in displaying. I'd like to display the English country region name as well as the state province name and the city, And I'm not interested in any of the customer information. The whole purpose of the customer information is to provide the foreign keys. But I am interested in the sales in my fact internet sales table. So I don't care about displaying the sales order number or the sales order line number, but I do want to display the sales amount and the tax amount. And we can even perform sums on those. Remember, if you're using aggregate functions, that you'll have to do a group by clause in your query. So I can just go down here and modify things. Here's my sales amount right here. I'll put the word sum around there. Close this off with the parentheses. And do the same thing with the tax information. And then I'll do my group by. Okay, get rid of that trailing comma right there. And that should be good. Now if we want to add an order by clause as well, you can do that. I'm going to hit next. We can specify tabular or matrix. I'll go with tabular. And I'm not going to put anything on each page. I'm just going to put everything on the same page. And I'll group by the region, state and city. And then the details are expression 1 and expression 2. I could have renamed those to the sum of the sales and sum of the tax. You can always go back and modify that. And here's the key. We want to enable drill down. So let's stick with Slate for the look and feel, and we'll just call this sales by region. Hit finish. And now we can preview this. You'll see that we have this plus right here, which lets us expand. So that's what the drill down means. We're drilling down to the next category. If you look in the design section, you'll see that this is all implemented through row groups down here. So you can always make modifications to those. As I mentioned, if you want to rename these, you can always right-click on these and modify the field properties. For right now, I'll leave them just like they are. Now the next thing I want to show you is drill through. That's when you have an original report, then you click on a link in that report, and it takes you to yet another report. It's like a child report. So let's start off with this existing report that we have right here. Everything looks just fine. And you'll see here that here's the total sales right here. Now what I'd like to do is click on this numeric value right here, which is the total sales and total tax for that particular city, and I'd like to see a more detailed report. So we'll create a separate report, and it's going to have a query parameter in there. Let's right-click under Reports. We'll add a new report, and we'll just use our query builder. Right-click on here. We're going to add tables. Our query is just going to look a little bit different this time. Let's add that. Let's add our customer, and then let's add our fact internet sales. Same 3 tables we're interested in. Okay, so we want to get the detailed information, so we're going to select the sales order number, sales order line number, and here let's put in, for example, the order quantity, unit price, total product cost, sales amount, and tax amount. Now we need to have our query parameter, so we're going to have a where clause in here. We'll say where. We're grabbing our geography key. Just copy that right there. Equals, put an @ sign, and let's just call it geo key. Now our parent report is going to be populating this geo key right here. I'll hit OK. Now if there's a syntax error, it'll let you know. We hit next, and we'll make this one tabular as well. And let's just put all of these in the details. Once again, do Slate. And let's call this report Sales Details by City. Hit your Finish button. Now when we click on Preview, you'll see that it prompts us for a geography key. I happen to know that there's a geography key of 2, so I can plug that in manually just to make sure that this portion is working, and it looks like it's working just fine. Okay, so now I can go to my other report right here. Make sure I go into design mode. We want our link to be in this first expression right here. So make sure you look at the properties right there, text box properties, and right here we're going to go to Action, and we're going to go to a report. Which report is it? Well, it's Sales Details by City, and we're going to add a parameter. Look at that, it's automatically populated for us. We're going to populate it with the geography key. Now notice that the geography key isn't in there. So how are we going to add it? Well, it's easy. What you can do is right-click on your data set right here and go to your query, and we can just add it there. You can manually type it in, or you can drag and drop. It's up to you. Make sure you also add that to the group by clause. So right in here, go ahead and select this. And then go down here, paste it, put a comma in there, and now we should be fine. So now when we right-click on here and we go to our text box properties, under Action, once again we'll go to our report, go to the Details by City, and we will add the geography key. Now if we want to test this, not a problem. Just click on Preview, and let's drill down to one of these values right here. See how we have a link now? You can click on that and see the results. So that was a drill through report. The child report replaces the parent report in the view. You can also choose to have a report include another report, and that's called a subreport. What I'm going to do is simply modify my existing report. So I'm going to go to my Sales by Region right here. We'll go into Design Mode. I've decided I'm going to get rid of this tax column right here, and I'm also going to rename my other column. We'll call this Sales. Now instead of having that simple expression in there, let's go ahead and get rid of this, and we can go to our toolbox, and you'll see here that we have subreport that we can just drag right in here. Then when we right-click on here and go to our subreport properties, we can specify which report to link to. So we can go to the Details by City, and then we can specify parameters. So I'll just go in here and say Add. Here's my geo key, and here's my geography key right here. And now when I run this, it might take a little bit longer to run because it's calculating both of those reports at the same time and putting one into the other. So here we can go ahead and expand this. Here's New South Wales, Coffs Harbour, and look at this. We've got a subreport. Once again, you can go in here and pretty things up, but those are the basic mechanics of subreports. Now that we have a report, let's go ahead and deploy it so it can be accessible by end users. So all we need to do is make sure that you right-click on here, make sure you go to your properties, and here for the target server URL, if it's not populated, make sure that you do populate it. It's going to be the server name, or if it's on the local host, you can say localhost or even 127.0.0.1, followed by the port number that this is residing on. Now out of the box by default it's on port 8080, but in my case I already had something running on that port, so I changed it to 8079 within my IIS configuration. And then /report server. So that is your URL that's going to be accessed. So I'm just going to hit OK on that, and then just open up a web browser, and you're going to type that in the URL box right up here. The only difference here is that instead of saying report server, you're just going to say reports, and it will automatically take you here. Okay, so we can go ahead and right-click here and deploy it. Once you deploy it, then you'll be able to see it on the web page. I can go ahead and hit refresh right here, and now you'll see that there's my data source as well as the reports review project. Here's my sales by region. There's my report. I can expand this. And you'll see that everything looks just fine. You can expand that to see the subreport. And of course, the end user can decide to export it by hitting this and maybe doing a CSV export. And it will just prompt them as to where to save it. So the end user should see something like this, and then they can either open it or save it as a file. Now, as far as the security, if you go to Properties right here, you'll see that we have General right here, and we also have Data Sources. This is where you can specify the custom data source. So in this case, it's the one that we shared there. And then you can specify how you're going to connect. So in our case, we are using Windows Integrated Security. If you specify credentials are not required, then in your Report Server Configuration Manager, you'll have to set up an execution account. So more on security a little bit later. I want to talk a little bit here about the execution of this report. This is where you can configure caching. So our default setup just says don't cache temporary copies of this report. But for performance reasons, you might decide to cache. Now, if you have any reports that take parameters, then there's going to be a cached version of each of those. So the first time somebody accesses a report, it's going to store it in cache until that report expires. You can specify a timeout on there. So let's say for one report we have a parameter where GeoKey is 2 and another one where the parameter is GeoKey equals 3. There's going to be a cache copy for each one of those. Well, let's go ahead and set up our caching. We can create a temporary copy of the report and we'll have it expire every 30 minutes. And your other option is to cache it and specify a following schedule. For example, I can configure a day of the week. I can specify each weekday and so on. I'd rather opt for the every 30 minutes. So I'm going to hit my back button right here and just specify that right there. Now when you're using caching, you don't have fine-grained control as to what time it's going to perform the cache. So if you want more fine-grained control, then you can perform snapshots. The functional difference between caching and a snapshot is that you can save multiple snapshots and look at your data several periods of time earlier. Whereas with caching, once a cached report is expired, it gets overwritten by the next one. In order to implement snapshots, you can go to your history. If you try to click on the new snapshot and it gives you an error such as report history cannot be created because the credentials to run the report are not stored, then you need to make sure you go into the report and specify stored credentials. So I'm going to go back to Properties right here, and I can go to my data sources, and I'm going to store my credentials right here. So I'm going to use Windows credentials, so this will be the name of my domain and then the username and the password. And since I'm using Windows credentials, I'm going to check that box right there and then hit apply. So now when I click on my history right here and I try to create a new snapshot, it's going to let me do that. So here we have our timestamp, and we can then of course create as many new snapshots as we want to. Now going back to our properties here, under execution, I can then specify snapshot instead of caching right here. And at this point we can click on use the following schedule to create the execution snapshots, and here we configure the schedule. So I might decide on a snapshot of every day of the week at a specified time, maybe 2 a.m. Make sure I hit OK there. Now this other option we have are subscriptions. And essentially with a subscription, you're going to have a recipient or a number of recipients, and they can be notified of new reports either by using a file share or by email or some other format. So I'm going to show you first of all how to create a just basic subscription, and then we'll talk about data-driven subscriptions. So new subscription right here, and here we'll say method of delivery. We'll do Windows file share. If we had our email configured, then you would see more options down there, and we'll just call this sales by region for the file name, and add a file extension when the file is created. Now you specify a path of where this is going to go. So my server name is Julie1, And I've actually created a Windows file share called My Reports. And the render format will be an XML data format, but it can be in other formats if you want. And then the credentials used to access the file share, you can specify something there or you can leave it blank. If you want a newer version to always clobber the older version, then choose that first option right there. Then as far as the scheduling, you can run the subscription when the report content is refreshed, or you can do this on a schedule. And here, like always, you can select which kind of schedule. So here, this is going to operate on Mondays at 8 a.m. If you want to specify otherwise, you can do so. Okay, so let's then talk about data-driven subscriptions. Now, a data-driven subscription is going to be used if your recipients are going to be fluctuating a lot, or you want to specify parameters at runtime. Before we create this data-driven subscription, I want to show you what I did in SQL Server Management Studio. I have actually created a database called subscribers, and I have a table in there called user info, and this is the data that's inside of it. So I might have 3 different recipients, Gray, Johnson, and Smith, and they want their reports in different formats. So this is your variable information. We're going to be referencing this table in our data-driven subscription. So the way we do this is we click on New Data-Driven Subscription. Our description here will be dynamic recipients, and the method of delivery will be Windows file share, and let's specify this for this subscription only instead of on a shared data source. Okay, so here we have our data source type is SQL Server. Our connection string is going to be, we're tapping into our local host, and the initial catalog is the subscribers database, and the credentials that are stored on the report server is going to be my domain, followed by the username, and then of course the password. That's going to be a Windows credential. If you're using SQL Server credentials, then make sure that box is not checked there. And then we'll hit Next. So here we can just say select star from user info. So that's the table that we're drawing information from, and then we can click on Validate to make sure that this is working. Okay, so it validated successfully, and then we'll hit Next. Now we specify the file name. So I'm going to grab this from the database, and here is my last name. The path, I'm going to put that on, there's my domain name right there, and the share is my reports. The render format, we're going to grab that actually from the database. And then the write mode, let's do auto increment, so when you have new reports, they'll just be automatically incrementing there. And the file extension, don't worry about the file extension. Username, provide the proper credentials as well as the password. And then hit Next. At this point, I'm going to hit Next. And then as far as notifying recipients, we can do that on a schedule created for this subscription. And then we can hit Next. Here's our schedule details. You can modify that if you want to. And you can also specify when you stop the schedule. I'm just going to hit Finish right there, and there is our data-driven subscription. Let's review what we learned in this nugget. We looked at the architecture, and whatever client is tapping into the report server is either going to be communicating through the report server or through an API such as the SOAP API. We'll have more discussion on the SOAP API in a later nugget. We created a simple report, and if you use the wizard, there's an option to provide a drill down, so make sure that that box is checked. In order to provide the drill through, usually the child report is going to have a parameter passed to it. So remember, the way we do that is to have a query parameter denoted by the @ in the child query. The sub-report is very much like a drill-through report, but the difference is that it is displayed within a report itself, as opposed to replacing the original report. So once again, you can have parameters getting passed to the sub-report. Then we provided a simple deployment. Make sure you provide the proper URL for the report server before you deploy your reports. Once you've deployed your server, then you can just open up a browser and navigate to your hostname :port number /reports. From there you can configure things such as data source security and execution accounts. So for a given report, you can perform caching, which improves your performance, or you can have more control with snapshots. Remember to make sure that if you're going to create a snapshot, you have to have the stored credentials. You'll get an error message if you're not configured properly. And we also created our subscriptions. Remember, there's two different types of subscriptions. There's your basic subscription, and then there's the data-driven subscription, where we can get dynamic data from an underlying data source. Well, I hope this has been informative, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.